Hey everybody, welcome to Contra Talk. My name is Richard Henry, and this is the podcast where we talk about things that matter. Today we're talking about something that I think matters a lot, and it matters really to the church globally, is church planting. It's not just about church planting. We're talking about heritage. We're talking about not despising where you've come from and other older generations, rural country people. We shouldn't have an animosity towards people, especially as other Christians. Today our guest is a friend. He is a husband and a father. Pastor Michael Clary. He pastors a Southern Baptist church. It's a Reformed Baptist church as well there in Cincinnati. And it's a great conversation talking about all those things, looking at his heritage from West Virginia and going to Kentucky and then now in Ohio, and just how he came to Christ and looking at that, and even the realization that he had after following Keller and Driscoll and some of those guys and realizing, yeah, we shouldn't really go this route. You know, the whole city urban context maybe is not as romantic and better than any other context. So it's a great conversation. I hope you enjoy it. All right, Michael Clary, welcome, brother. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you today?
Good. Well, I appreciate you taking some time. I know you're there at church and you're pastoring there in Cincinnati. You've been a pastor of a church plant, or was a church plant 15 years ago. And we're going to be talking probably about your book another time, but we're going to talk about your story a little bit, how you got to Cincinnati. I know you're a graduate of Southern, so we've got some ties there as well.
Yeah.
But how you landed there, your background's West Virginia, but just kind of tell us a little bit more about who you are, and we'll get to some specific questions about your story and how the Lord's moved in your life.
Yeah. I was born and raised in Huntington, West Virginia. So I've got the Appalachian roots, and the correct pronunciation is Appalachian. People that people say Appalachian. I don't know where they get that, but at least where I'm from, we call it Appalachian. But born and raised in that environment, and you know, it's almost like the Disney movie stereotype, where you've got a dream of getting away from here, getting out of this town and out into the big city, and I want to make my mark in the world. And I always had that kind of impulse when I was a kid. So I went to Marshall University, and that's where my faith really took off in a powerful way, because I got connected with Campus Crusade group. They call it Cru now. At the time, they called it Campus Crusade for Christ. And I was raised, the church I went to growing up was pretty small. They didn't have any youth or really any fellowship. So this was the first time I had friends that were Christians my age. And not only that, but they really loved the Lord, passionate about Christ. So that was a huge turning point for me. After I graduated, I just had a sense that I'm made for ministry, and Cru being a pivotal part made sense. So I joined staff with Cru. I got married in 1999. I actually met my wife on a summer mission trip with Cru. I met her in 97. We got married in 99. But we ended up joining staff with Cru together, and our assignment was to the University of Louisville. And that's how we ended up in Louisville, Kentucky. And while I was there, I was working at the university, but I'd wanted to attend Southern Seminary already. And so it was a natural thing for me to take a few classes here and there, and eventually going full time into seminary. And what was a big precipitating thing for that was, while I was doing college ministry, it was almost like, a mixing board. My love and devotion for campus ministry was just kind of fading down in the mix. It was like, this doesn't seem to fit well. And there were a lot of things that you do in campus ministry. It's almost like some things in church and that you see that apply to the church. It's like, well, we can do that if it's convenient for us. But if there are other things that you're required to do as a church, like, well, we're not a church. So it was like an excuse to not do those things. So if it's cool, it's interesting to do a baptism. Hey, let's baptize some students. But if it's church discipline, or if you need to hold somebody accountable for sin, it's like, hey, we're not the church, or we're an evangelistic outreach. And so it just seemed like we're cherry picking when we obey or not obey what the scripture says. And I'm like, that really troubled me. While simultaneously, a second channel on the mixing board, my love for the church was growing as I started to see this is God's plan A for the world. And that was that corresponded to a desire to attend seminary and to, study theologically.
Hey, everybody, it's me. If you're liking this, or even if you're not, but if you are, or you're not, please like it. Click the little thing. It's right here somewhere. And then also hit subscribe. It helps me out. I know everybody says that, but I really mean it. I mean it with all my heart. But otherwise, just hit like and subscribe. Appreciate it. Back to the show.
So as I was going through my seminary degree at Southern, what was coming next was the big question. One path would be, you do I'm a musician, so you can do the music minister role and then maybe work into a lead pastor position or associate pastor role and kind of bounce around. But I really wanted to establish myself in a community and to not bounce around, just move all over. I wanted to be set in a place. And church planting was really all the rage at the time. I think that's died down a bit, but there in the mid 2000s, that was the thing. So combined with my campus ministry experience, so you have to do a lot of innovation and, trying new things and build stuff from scratch and do it again every year. That there was a lot of appeal to kind of cross these worlds, to take what I love about campus ministry and what I love about the church and combine them into church planting. So it was that crystallized into, I would say was a legitimate call of the Holy Spirit to plant a church. And then from there was a matter of, well, where do we go? In Louisville, everybody and their brother was planting churches at the time. And so it's like, there's church plants everywhere and they're all Reformed Baptist. Who would have thought? I started to look around, and so we have Cleveland in the north part of Ohio, and then Huntington, West Virginia is more in across the river from the southernmost part of Ohio. And a bit in between the two is Cincinnati. Columbus could have fit the bill also, but I knew a guy planting a church similar to what I would want in Columbus at the time, but I didn't know anybody doing anything in Cincinnati. So drawn to an urban environment, Midwestern, Rust Belt kind of thing, in Ohio, close to family. Cincinnati made a lot of sense. We prayed about it. We could travel easily back and forth from Louisville to Cincinnati. And if anybody's been to Cincinnati, there's this part where if you're coming up in the south from Louisville or from the airport into town, here local, we call it the cut in the hill, but you round the highway and then seemingly out of nowhere, just the skyline bursts out in front of you. And you're on this hillside, and you just see this huge skyline and the river in front. And you also have some of the northern Kentucky neighborhoods and those buildings. It's breathtaking. It's a beautiful sight, a beautiful vision of the city. And every time I come there, I was just drawn in. I'm like, man, this seems like a place that I would love to be. And the more research I did, and I've discovered it's a kind of town that there's a lot of appeal to it, big enough to where it feels like you're really tackling a big challenge, but still it does have some appeal like a small town, and so we thought that's it, Cincinnati. And we ended up talking to in the Baptist world, we have the director of missions guy. So I contacted the local director of missions guy, and he told me that we've planted churches all around the perimeter, the peripheral of the city, but we don't have any churches in the city core. And so he drove me around the urban neighborhoods, but especially around Clifton, which is close to the University of Cincinnati. It's like right in the heart of the city. And he said, we got nothing here. And then he took me into there is a Baptist campus ministry at UC. And so whenever, so he took me into that, and they have a house there. And then this house, there's a map on the wall of Cincinnati. So the guy in there showed me this map, and I noticed there's these little pins put in this huge map, and all the pins were all around the edges of the city, around the the loop of the highway. And so I asked this guy, I'm like, what do all these pins represent? And he said, well, all of the students that are part of our ministry, they put a pin where they go to church. And that visualized for me, there's a lot of students that are attending here, and there's no churches that are that can minister to them locally. And all of those things tended to drive us toward the heart of the city in this Clifton neighborhood, and that's where we planted a church. And that I moved here in 2008. We launched officially in 2010, and this building that we're in now was given to us. There was a Southern Baptist church that we got to know, but they were part of a different association, and there was a dozen elderly people that were part of this church.
Wow.
And so they let us rent offices here for a while, and then the pastor took me to lunch one day. He's this good old boy. He's a country guy. And he's like, Michael, let me tell you, we've been praying about this. What would you boys say about us just giving you that building? And I said, let me pray about it. Yes, we'll take it.
Yeah.
And so it's a great building at a strategic place. And we've put a bunch of money fixing it up and made it look nice. And it's been, it's a big blessing to us to be here.
Well, that's cool. That's cool. That's cool. Not cool. So you're from West Virginia then, though. And one thing that caught my eye, because like I said, we talk and we're in a couple groups and whatever, but you had also shared a few things where you'd written an article, and I think you mentioned it off recording, but having kind of this Tim Kellery type of in the city for the city. I know Sojourn, of course, community church, probably the biggest in Louisville as far as that kind of mindset. I wasn't ever a huge Sojourn guy or anti-Sojourn guy, but that's, of course, guys from Southern. But a lot of guys left Southern and or didn't finish. There are some professors that go there, et cetera. Fine. And okay. But there was that kind of mindset. And I did listen to some sermons where some of those guys were kind of rebuking those who went into the city, but then they had kids and the for the city, with the city, all that in the city. Kind of was like, actually, it's more for the suburbs or more for the rural. And so it's interesting, but you get changed when you get married and or have kids. Like there is a level of like, I don't know, like I'd rather have my kids just play out in the yard. Like there's nothing wrong with that, right? There's nothing wrong with living in a high rise and ministering to people and homeless or college students either, right? But I think, we see so often in our culture, we have people kind of ragging on some other believers because they don't do their flavor of ministry. It's like, come on.
That's right.
Anyway, I say that because you went right to the heart of it, which is great. And, the Lord using those things in the map and this SBC church that's dying. But you started to imbibe that kind of Kellerite pride, I guess, in a bad way. Right.
Yeah.
And you'd kind of had that mindset. Why don't you talk a little bit more about that? I knew you were really, the church caught fire, North American Mission Board or NAMB really took notice. And this was, just give us some dates on that or years on that for context. But how does that continue to work and kind of tell us that story?
Yeah. By the way, Richard, there's a guy, my worship leader is in the sanctuary behind me, and from the studio we're at, you might hear some of his vocals just sort of kind of carry over into the recording. But
it's all good.
If you're wondering what that is, so back in that time, everybody was doing traditional church ministry, and traditional church ministry had a certain set of priorities and a bag of tools that you train your pastors to do. You got your hospital ministry, your visitation, that sort of thing. And so whenever this church planting idea exploded, it took a while to develop some of these new tools and for that to be trained in church planters. But then there was this new thing, which was an urban focus. And Tim Keller, probably more than anybody else, really pressed that home into everybody's thinking. It's like, hey, and he had a theological argument, he had practical tools and training. It's like, it was a very well crafted message that to
Mhm.
reach the next generation, to reach the culture, we have to reach the urban centers. And that was operative in my mind whenever I was considering planning a church in Cincinnati. So I was like, okay, I want to go to Cincinnati. I want to be in the city. We're going to be for the city. We're going to transform the city by being a faithful presence, and all the talking points. And you think like, well, there's really half a dozen guys tops that really seem to know what they're doing in this field. And Tim Keller is at the
Mhm.
top of that list. So what he says to do, it's like you're a young church planner, you're inexperienced, you've never been a pastor before, you follow the guys that know what they're doing. And so I followed the guys that knew what they were doing. And I
Mhm.
started to implement those tools. And the thing is they work. It really does work. You attract an audience, and you attract a particular kind of audience, and you attract them with a particular message. And
Mhm.
in my youthful naivete, I did not realize that those have their value judgments and there's a moral compass built into the way you speak. And part of that moral
Mhm.
compass, you alluded to this earlier, is a sense of pride that we're the missional ones. We're the ones that are truly following God's mission. We're the ones that are, sacrificing financially and in other ways to live in the city.
Mhm.
And there wasn't an acknowledgement that, cities are an urban playground. It's filled with lots of toys and entertainment. But we don't talk about anything negative. We only just talk about, there's this sense of we're the ones that the world has been waiting for to come and rescue the city, and we're going to transform it
Mhm.
and bring Christ to it. So that initially that appealed to me, and you felt like, okay, you're making a difference. And my church plant launched, and it predated by a few years the send strategy that NAMB, North American Mission Board, Southern Baptist, what they adopted. So
Oh, okay. Yeah.
they were like, so before that, all the church planting strategy with the Southern Baptist was in the areas where Southern Baptists were, which is largely rural areas. And so Kevin
Right.
Ezell took over NAMB, and he said, we're going to do an urban focused strategy. So he was a Keller disciple, maybe not directly, but he bought the message. And they said,
Mhm.
we're going to pick 25 of the top cities in America and focus, almost all of our resources there. And Cincinnati was one of those cities, but I was already here. So while they're looking
Mhm.
for who can we talk to, who are the exemplary church plants that have kind of made it in the city, and my name came up as one of the guys that had done it. And I did it by using the tools. And I mean, that's not to
Mhm.
discount God's Spirit at work, but God's Spirit works through the means, and the means in this case was the tools. That
Yeah.
your tools do come with baggage. Tools
Yeah.
are not morally neutral, and these tools definitely had
Yeah.
baggage that came with them. And the baggage in my case was in myself. It's like there was a pride that was not kept in check. And it's a pride, just a feeling like, look at what I've done. It's sort of a
Mhm.
similar pride of sinful pride that David had whenever he counted, did a census. So it's like, look at all these people. Now, we weren't a mega church. I mean, we're 300-ish people, so it wasn't
Mhm.
huge. But to do that, so the neighborhood I'm in was just considered a graveyard for church plants. Like nobody made
Mhm.
it. Every church plant that ever tried this neighborhood didn't make it. So for whatever
Wow.
reason, our church was one of it happened to succeed. It happened to make it. Um, and so there was this sense that I made it when nobody else did, and
Yeah.
I'm smart, and look at us, look what we did. It was just there was this feeling of pride that I knew it was there. It grieved me, but it wasn't as though it was ever being called out. And it was
Mhm.
it was an elitist looking down. And there were a couple times I heard Driscoll make fun of country people. He would talk about,
Yeah.
banjo picking country bumpkins that have 3 teeth and they married their second cousin or whatever. And that was
Yeah.
funny. People would laugh. But if you're in Seattle and you're cool, then of course, yeah, you can afford to look down with contempt upon
Right.
people that you think are lesser than you. And Driscoll was another one of those guys, Mark Driscoll, that I would listen to his sermons and think, yeah, that's funny. And so I would kind of throw some of those sort of lines and jokes into my own sermons. But then at some point, I can't pinpoint it, but it dawned on me that there is I'm making fun of my people because this is where I'm from. I'm from Appalachia. My people are country people. My family are, many of the stereotypes that characterize Appalachia that applies to my family. But then those stereotypes come with, there are pictures in my mind of who these people are. My grandparents, my grandfathers, especially, they were men that were faithful. And my grandfather and my great grandfather were both preachers. I guess you could call them independent fundamentalist Baptist. I don't know if they would know that label, but it's probably in the neighborhood.
Sure. Yeah.
Tiny little churches, never did it for a salary, just preaching faithfully on Sundays. And I'm like, these men, they represent something that I was making fun of that is faithful in ways that, ways that I admired. And so there was a conviction that grew within me to eventually, I got to the point where this is wrong. And I repented of it. And I'll stop there in case there's anything you want to say.
No. I mean, that's good. And I mean, and what you're saying is what many guys, churches, pastors did and have done and probably still do to a degree. I mean, I know for me, not the same story, and this isn't about me, but it's relevant in the sense that even in California, I mean, I still think California is the best state. I think Gavin Newsom's a snake. He's probably just pure evil. But I wish, the liberals would go home because so many liberals moved there. Now, they've lost over 1 million people in the last couple of years because of COVID crazy and all that other stuff. And people finally waking up to the draconian policies. But I used to think as a Bible church, I'm just a Bible Christian. I don't need a denomination. And it's very prevalent the further west you get. The pioneer kind of bootstrap, because 150 years ago, the people that are there now in several generations, and that was me to a degree, at least on some sides, that you have to take the risk to leave St. Louis or Cincinnati or Louisville, Atlanta, and go west and say, I hear there's opportunity in Nevada. I hear there's opportunity in California. We're going to go, and that's before the Industrial Revolution and everything, and risking life and limb, the Oregon Trail computer game and all that. And that's just that spirit. But you have that, and I don't need a denomination, and I love MacArthur to a degree. I disagree with him on a few things, but there is that sense that and the Calvary chapels and both California churches, multiple, there aren't Grace Community churches like Calvary Chapel churches, but they effectively are, where there are guys that go to the seminary and they plant churches that are little micro versions to a degree of Grace, where MacArthur pastors. And that sentiment is very strong. It's not the same country bumpkin-y thing, but it's we're just Jesus and our Bible. That's all we need. And to a sense, that's true. Yeah, it is just about being a Christian and following Christ. But you're also in a community, and there is also a tradition, and there is heritage there, and there is stuff that we can learn from, and your great-grandparents, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so there is that point when we disparage our past that it's just unwise. I mean, you're just cutting your legs off at the knees and trying to still walk around like a normal human being. It's just not going to work. And what you're saying, that definitely happened to you. And praise God that it happened, that you saw it, and now you've learned from it, you repented of it. You wrote an article about that. Tell us about that and kind of the experience you had with that. Like I said, I watched one of the videos. Your channel's up here in front of me as well. I forget which video it was. You can tell us, but tell us more about that and how you kind of came to your senses and was like, hold on. My grandfather, great-grandfather, all the way down, these men love the Lord. They're not educated. They live in houses made with whatever. But, man, they love the Lord far more than a lot of these other people in the city. I was an idiot. But, God's gracious. God's gracious. So tell us about that.
Yeah. While I'm talking here, I want to try to find a photo on my iPad, see if I can show it to you. Um, the, the one of the things that dawned on me was this sense that I came from a place, and that place, there's value there, and it helped to tell me who I am, who I am. Like, this place shaped me, and a lot of the values that I hold that are important to me came from a being anchored to some place that is not merely a dot on a map, but it is a people. And my grandparents, I saw them. I saw them as people that suffered, and they suffered, but they didn't really. It's not like they were thinking of it in those ways. Just they were just getting by, doing what they could. But looking back from our modern vantage point of relative prosperity compared to what they had, I realized they did suffer. So there's this picture that I have in my office, and this picture is of my. Let's see if I can find it here. This picture is of my great grandfather. He wrote a poem, and the poem was in 1928 that he wrote it. And I it's all written out in handwriting, and the spelling is horrible, but so it's just like it shows his just his level of education at the time, but it shows his heart. And so this poem is framed in my office, and it's almost 100 years old. So it's 28. So that would be 95 years ago, more or less. And we'd come through a season of trial, a lot of difficulty and pain in the church. And so it was a Thursday morning, last December of 2022. I walk into my office. Thursday is a day I usually write my sermon, and I look up there and I see it. So I just pulled it down and looked at it. Even now I get emotional just thinking about it. It's like I pulled it down, I read it, and it hit me in a. I've talked about this so many times, and every time I still get emotional. I don't know why.
No, that's good.
I read it, and it was just like the sense of God faithfully carried me through something incredible, an incredible ordeal, a trial. And then my heart was connected to my great grandfather, who wrote about 95 years ago. He died, a while back, but I knew him well because he lived to be 102 years old. But it was almost like this moment that I shared with my great grandfather, who also was a preacher, called to do ministry. And it was like, man, like I've inherited a tradition from my great grandfather and then from my grandfather. And yet I think it just brought to mind things that I had done and had felt early in my ministry that was eager to distance myself from them, because one of the tools in ministry in this environment is you cater to the elitist attitude of the urban core. You coddle that pride and tell them, yeah, you're better than everybody else. And so the way you do that at the expense of country people. And I'm like, these are my people. I feel like I'd betrayed my family. I betrayed my grandfather, great grandfather. And that right in that moment, it really hit me. And so at the time, I was on Twitter. I had 700 followers. Nobody, and I only had 700 followers just because I'd been on so long, and I'd interacted here and there. So I wrote out a little thread. I was like, hopefully this will bless somebody. And after I hit send, it was like within an hour, I was getting messages from people that I knew, saying like, hey, dude, have you seen what's going on with that thread on Twitter? And I was like, no, I didn't. So I pulled out my phone and I looked, and it had exploded. I mean, it ended up several millions of views, thousands of shares, comments like crazy. And then people that it's like, I know that I've never met them, but big names that I know, I read their material, I appreciate their work. It's like they're retweeting it, they're commenting on it. They're like, man, like I was so blessed by this. And so I was floored because I'm like,
Wow, that's really cool.
I'm nobody. But then all of a sudden, and then my follower count like tripled in the next day. And so I got calls from a few different media companies. I was doing interviews. And then American Reformer, they reached out and said, hey, why don't you turn this into an article for American Reformer, which I did. And then about last month or so, I took that American Reformer piece and I turned it into a video that I put on my podcast. Plain Speech Podcast is my YouTube channel, and that I put the video there. So that's where it's at now.
Right on. Yeah, we'll put that in the description as well. Link in the comments. Now, praise God, bro. That's really good. I mean, I love stories like that because you don't always hear that, right? And I'm only me. I can only speak for me, but a lot of times you think big picture about any number of subjects. At least I do, and you don't know. You come to the realization, again, I do, that I don't know anything, or know so few things. About church plants over here, successful ministry over there. What's life really like in Ethiopia or Russia? We hear the news over here about this thing and that thing, and we see the podcast, we see the Twitter feed, or the stream, whatever. And it's just like, man, we're so small. And then when you hear something real and raw like that from pastor, a husband and father, guy who's from this area, now in this area, and realizing, man, I was an idiot.
Yeah.
And I just want to share this and praise God for his faithfulness, right? Kind of calling you an idiot, but
well, I'll call me an idiot. I'm fine with
it.
Yeah,
I mean, I was an idiot too. I mean, I call it geographical snobbery. Like, oh, California's the best. I think it still is, but there's plenty. We love Kentucky, and other places are great too. But it's until you get there, until you open up yourself to realize, hold on, these are still people. This is still an area. You got to live somewhere. Food is, this type of food is still good. Whatever the category, you realize, I'm kind of being a little arrogant here. I'm being a little prideful. Like, dang it, that kind of sucked. But it's good that I saw that, and thankful for the Lord's kindness. No, that's good. Now, speaking of your channel, because I just pulled it up, you did another one, and this is something, and this is off the cuff because we didn't talk about this before, but you made a video over a month ago, why men don't sing in church, and it looks like it's pretty high viewage for the ratio. And tell us about that, because I have a lot of comments. They're good comments, but I want to hear your words, why you made that video, and what's your experience of men not singing in church and all that.
Yeah, I'm a worship leader, and so that's what that was a big part of music. Has always been a big part of my upbringing and life. And so forth. I've led worship, and so there's a musical interest there. Having led worship, and there again, it's like, what are you taught? It's like you make fun of the granny hymns and the hymnals and all that. It's like you make fun of that, and then it's like there's a church here in town. I don't think they do this anymore, but they kind of present themselves as the edgy church, and they're like, we're not your grandma's church. It's like as though there's something morally defective about your grandmother and her church.
Well, of course.
That's basically their way of saying we don't wear suits and we don't sing hymns. We wear ripped up jeans and we do rock songs. But then I notice that a lot of times, like maybe not universally, but a lot of times I watch guys in a worship environment, and they are just checked out. They don't sing and they won't sing, but there are times when they will, and those are the times that stand out. And you wonder, what is it about this moment, this time, this song, whatever? Why do they sing here and not there? And I started to make some observations, and I'm like, a lot of times it's the song is too high, you can't reach the notes, and so it's just like, I can't sing that high. I'm not Axl Rose. I don't have the super tenor voice. And there's also the words are just gay, effeminate, weird. you're singing about Jesus in ways that sound like he's a girlfriend or something. And I'm like, that's just
Yeah.
awkward. A lot of guys don't like singing
Yeah.
love songs to other guys.
Yeah.
And then it's
Go
the
figure.
worship.
Yeah. Go figure.
Yeah. Who would have thought? And then sometimes the worship leader, whoever it is that's leading the worship, it's like men want to be led. And so if men won't follow somebody they don't want to follow. So if the guy leading the worship is a guy that people don't want to follow, now this isn't absolute or universal, but at least it's a data point. It's going to be something that he's got something to overcome. He's going to have to overcome his feeling like the guy leading the music is either not really sincere, or it's a performance, or, a lot of times, sadly, it's like the worship leaders themselves. They just have there's a reason why there's a skinny jeans stereotype of worship leaders. And a lot of times there's something effeminate about it. And so men in the pew, normal guys, for that guy, just think of a dude, it's like a mechanic or a plumber. He walks into church. What will help him to sing and really lift up his voice to Jesus the way the scriptures tell us to? Well, there's some things that will make it harder and things that'll make it easier. And worship leaders are wise to be attentive to what's going to help him. And I think masculine songs that feel masculine, it's presented in a masculine way. The pitch is right, and there's a cadence to it. And even as a worship leader, you've probably seen experiences before in church where if there's like a musical break, but it's like you might expect the next note of singing, but the worship leader puts a musical break there. And so you're like, but then it's like your voice is singing out there, but nobody else is. It's like nobody wants an impromptu solo, and everybody's turning around and they notice that you hit it. It's like worship leaders, they ought to think in everything they do, they think, okay, what will help people here sing and really feel confident to sing? So a good, strong voice that people can follow. They can follow the melodies that are singable. Those sorts of things, I think, make a huge difference. And so I made that video, and when I posted it, I got a lot of comments, and it did make a way around, because a lot of the comments are from men who say, man, like, this is exactly what I've thought. This is exactly how I feel. And I just gave words to them, I think.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. No, I totally see that. I'm not going to pull it up, but yeah, I see that. Thanks, Michael. This is great. Thank you. Exactly how I feel. Really well done. Never thought about this before. Interesting. Thought some people don't sing because they can't. Yeah. Yeah. And that's, and like I said, for the audience, I'll link the video down below. But singing is one of those things. It's part of worship, and it's one of those, we have such a feminine, like you're saying. And I've talked to a couple people about it. I had one musician on a while back, although I just realized that show will come out by the time this one comes out. But it's weird to say things like that because it's not out right now. But scheduling, hey, digital, whatever. But there is that lack because the church so often is feminized, right? You have different things, floral this and decorating committees, and especially if it's a Baptist church, Bible church, community church, and I think the vacuum of losing or rejecting a heritage, really, something's got to fill the vacuum, right? We see that in the world, geopolitics. We see that in people's lives. If you have something and then it leaves, something else has to fill it, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And a lot of times people's experience is that. And with singing especially, it's a performance. Generally, females are a little more maybe outgoing in that way. Women talk longer, more than men do generally. And that kind of works its way to other things like, oh, we should do that. Oh, that looks really cute. How many times do I hear a woman say, wow, you look really cute today? Oh, maybe they'll even talk about their features. Hey, that looks great. You look great. That looks, no guy does that. I mean, barely. You know, like, oh, I kind of like that. I like that coat. That's a nice suit coat. Or, hey, nice frames or something. But like, that's it. We're not like, man, you look hot today. Like, no guy's going to say that to another guy in a normal way unless you're joking around, right?
Yeah.
Or you're picking them up. And so men and women, go figure, we're different. But it's something with singing, I think, especially you have then the advent of a lot of music or directors, or, you know, if it's a female, it can be a worship director, but if it's a male, it's a worship pastor. That's a whole other conversation. Chime in if you want to add anything to that.
Okay, I'll make a comment about that.
I don't know.
So singing is not a feminine thing, but a lot of the singing that is done in churches is more feminine.
Right.
And the thing about so masculine men are going to feel more of an impulse to distance himself from the feminine than feminine women are going to feel a need to distance themselves from the masculine. So women are fine. So it's like if a woman, it's like my wife, she'll put on my slippers to go take the dog out. And it just
oh, man, it's not true. My wife steals my shirts all the time.
Yeah, but it's like for a woman to do that, it's almost like that's an expression of her femininity that she will,
and a love for her husband, and like think,
it's like I'm connected to him, I love him, and you know I don't mind even wearing something that associates me with him. But men don't do that unless something is messed up in his mind. And so same thing with worship music. So I think if a man that leads worship with a masculine presence isn't going to alienate women the way a woman leading music or an effeminate man leading music will alienate men. And so you want to have a strong masculine presence leading worship, and that helps men to feel more confident in singing. And the thing is that scripture doesn't command us to have worship services. We're commanded to sing. So, I mean, we do gather for worship, but worship is the whole gathering. It's not just the singing or musical part, but the commandment is not to have a worship band or a worship performance. The command is to sing. So that was a development in my thinking about congregational singing, is that some songs are like, even worship songs are written to be listened to, and they evoke a certain feeling. And I don't think that that's bad or wrong, because it's written and performed to be heard. But a lot of those songs that sound good don't sing good. And so you want to have songs that really are more conducive to singing. And there's an example I use in the video, is that it's like called a sea shanty or whatever, but those songs were written with a purpose in mind. It's like you have sailors on a ship, and there's a certain cadence of the boat, and there's a cadence of the work they do, same thing like scrub the decks or whatever. And the example that I use is from it's a Brian Sauvé song. It's like, it'll be all right if the Lord be on our side, it'll be all right. And it's like you kind of get this feeling of, it's like, yeah, I could feel movement, but because it's got a dum da dum da dum da dum, it's got this cadence and rhythm. It's easy to catch on to. It's a catchy melody. Men like minor key is a little darker and a little more masculine. If you ever seen the movie Spinal Tap, you'd be like, D minor is the saddest of all keys. It's kind of like a minor key does have something that is, I can't quite describe it, but minor keys do have something that feel a little bit darker, and I think it's more serious, more sober. Men connect with that in a different way. So that there's a lot that could be said, but I think if it were just a goal, a desire in churches in general, hey, how can we help the men sing? I think if you find a way to address that, then you're helping everyone to sing. And if men sing, if the fathers in a home sing, then the kids, the wife, it kind of leads everybody. They'll follow along. That's how I see it.
Yeah, I mean, it's the whole patriarchy is inevitable. And you see the statistics that, you can do what you want with statistics to a degree, any statistic, I suppose, but still overwhelmingly, even with faith, with salvation, with boys who grow up to be murderers and rapists and everything else, probably didn't have a dad around, right? Like, it's just statistically, that's what it is. Or they get into drugs and alcohol. Whereas if they do, generally they don't do this. Women who your young little girls have a dad around, they're not promiscuous. Whereas if they don't have a dad around, they generally are. And if the mom is a Christian, or if one of the people is a Christian, one of the kids, the parents, not so much. And if the mom is, more so, but if the dad is, it's exponentially, everybody's a Christian, and you can argue with that soteriologically, the, eternity past, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
That's what boots on the ground. That's what it is. Yeah. And so men, shape up, stop being pushed around, say hard things, do hard things, sing, love the Lord, and love your family and lead. Because I mean, that's classic Genesis 3, right? Yeah. The man's not, he's there, she's there. Snake goes to the woman because she's weaker. We all know that. That sounds effeminate and bad. And you're such a racist or whatever. Sexist. Probably a racist too, right? And yet, that's what it says. Men can do more push-ups and pull-ups. That's why we're designed that way. Yeah. And it's more than that to a degree. But he goes to the woman, but the man's with her, right? And then they pass the buck, and we know the story. And so, when I see that all the time, and I've had interviews with people for positions. One was several years ago, and they're like, "Well, what if there's no men for eldership? What if there's faithful women, yada, yada." I'm like, no, God's not a pragmatist, and elders, pastors are to be men. That's it. But so much of that is 60, 70, 80% a church is female. And so the men aren't doing their job. Therefore, the women do it, and both are failing. Both are sinning, and both are doing it wrong. And it's like, why do we think it's going to be blessed? Why do we think that there's going to be faithfulness or God's going to bless that faithfulness, because it's not actually faithful in the right things? I mean, you can be faithfully beating your wife or worse, other things, and it's faithful. It's got to be a good thing, right? So,
I have this is anecdotal, but my observation is whenever a man does a masculine task, his focus is on the task. There may be other motives, but what is at least evident from observations, he's focused on the task. So as an elder, pastor, whatever, it's like he's pastoring, eldering, preaching, whatever. When a woman does those same things, so if a woman is preaching or if a woman is an elder, invariably she draws attention to the fact that it is a woman doing it. It's almost like the fact that she's a woman, it becomes part of the job description, and it alters the job. And that it's like I'm proving something rather than just executing a task. Now, there could be any number of things that you can say that could be the cause of that, but I think that it's noteworthy. It is noteworthy that this is it makes it more performative. And of course, in my opinion, the reason why so many people think that women would make good pastors is because the job description that's operative in their mind about what a pastor does is all feminine kind of characteristics. They think of the pastor purely in terms of nurturing and care and being more like this mothering sort of presence. And they have no category at all for the masculine type of duties of pastoring, which would be, discipline and rebuking, correcting, training, shepherding, the sort of accountability thing that those sort of things, like, well, break glass if necessary, but that's a small little part of it. When really it's like, no, that is the essence of pastoral ministry. Is like, you are a shepherd. It's like pasture. The words even themselves are related. But in the modern world, we think of a pastor he's like a hospice chaplain. He's a guy that is just there to hold your hand and to comfort you in your pain. But I think that is part of pastoral work, but that is certainly not the lion's share of pastoral work.
And that's funny. I heard a guy I just talked a few weeks ago, and he was sharing with another guy's struggles and the struggles I've been having, that he's like, yeah, this guy was saying this church just wants a chaplain. And I'm like, man, that sounds familiar. I've heard that other places too. And, churches probably who are like that probably don't even realize that's what they want, but because that's only been their experience with, the last 10, 20, 30 years, Pastor Bob did this and that, and he always was whatever, and growing up in this church. And there isn't this heritage, again, going back to that and not despising it or hating it. And whether that's, you're from New York City 5 generations, or you're from West Virginia or California or whatever, it's still, if you cut yourself off, then you don't have anything to look back to except for the very close in your own experience.
Yeah.
Right. Like we've learned, you and I, pastoring churches, and then going into pastoring at churches, one a church plant, one an established church, different areas, all that other stuff. But we went to churches, we had parents and spiritual heritage and all that other stuff. Like it or not, we brought into our Christian ministry. Like we all do that, even if you're not a pastor or a ministry person, whatever, missionary.
Mm-hmm.
You function, you have your guys, you have your gals, if whatever, your lady, whatever. And I like to listen to this and read this. But we often don't question it or push back and think, is that really good or is that really bad? Or, maybe it's not, I don't agree with it, but I'm still thankful for it.
Yeah.
Right? Like MacArthur, right? I'm really thankful for him. Don't agree with a lot of his stuff, but still love him, his faithfulness, COVID. I mean, he's been the same pastor for like 55 years. Like you can't, that's just insane. Right. Probably should retire pretty soon or should have already, but just his stalwart, stand there, open the Bible, no frills. This is what it is. Like, it's really hard to argue with that. Right. And so anyway, there's one last thing I wanted to ask you about, and it was before we were recording. So you had, we'll kind of get back to I know I asked about music and we kind of sidetracked.
I found that picture, by the way. This is,
oh, good. Yeah. Showed up.
Oh man, I just scrolled past it. Let me this is from the American Reformer article, but this is what the picture looks like in the office, and it's this scribbled,
That's cool.
handwriting, and
yeah.
But this poem is him telling his testimony. So it's like, when I was just a boy, I still remember. It was in the fall, about September, in a revival meeting started downtown with young and old from all around. And it goes on, but it's just a sweet thing, and
nice,
very special.
That's cool. That's good. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. I love little nuggets like that, personal things. It's good.
Yeah.
So you planted the church 15 years ago. NAMB was like, hey, who's this Michael guy? Let's talk. Let's do this. You kind of shared a lot of your stuff, wrote some articles, did some speaking. And then as you've transitioned from not being a Kellerite, for lack of a better word, or a Kellerite light, learning a lot from Keller and especially Driscoll, poo-pooing the three-tooth banjo playing, overall wearing hillbilly, or redneck. Apparently there's differences. I don't know the differences, but somebody might need to tell me. You shifted, right? And you went back to more like, oh, this is my heritage and I shouldn't disparage people because of who they are, et cetera. When was that date-wise? And then you mentioned, if you want to talk about it, you don't have to talk about it too much if you don't want, but you guys had a church split. And so you lost a number of people. If you can, or if you want, flesh that out a little bit, and just kind of the year from, planting in 2010 or 2008 and 10 in that area. And then when did you shift kind of back to, no, my heritage is good, I shouldn't disparage people from where they are, et cetera. That happened, and then people left. Is that right? People started to leave?
Well, it was not. This was a very long, protracted period of time. So I would say, there was a sense of conviction that started very early on, but that it takes a while to kind of work itself out and apply in different areas of your life, and this coincided with cultural movements. So I would say back in 2015 or so, there was a sense that there was something off about the Keller in the city for the city type of ministry that I'd been trained in, but I was thinking that, well, this is a matter of maybe this part is a little off, I'll tweak that a bit and I'll make an adjustment here. Just we're always growing, and as a pastor, it's like
Right.
The church individuals are growing in faith, and the pastor's growing, and you're learning things all the time. And so I'll make an adjustment here. One of the big shifts for me, and there's an article in American Reformer that I wrote called Contextualization, the Trojan horse for liberal propaganda, I think is the name of it. And I reflected on, I wrote a lot of reflections on this, where I thought that the gospel-centered preaching model, which is very much that's at the heart of the Keller strategy, but this idea that it's essentially antinomian, but it's antinomian in the most reformed gospelish kind of language, and that's not to say any individual is a committed antinomian, but that's the product. That's the outcome. And so one of the things you do is like you have to find ways to not offend people. And so like you have to be winsome, and winsome as a tool to apply in a situation, which winsome is a kind of a nebulous word. I mean, I prefer like kind, gentle words that have some more concrete. Yeah. But winsome basically says it implies a perception of the hearer rather than kind, which is an action on the speaker. So if I speak to you, Richard, and I'm kind and gentle, then I control how I speak, and it's all up to me. But if I say I want to be winsome to Richard, then if you perceive me to be unkind, then I have failed to be winsome. And so it kind of puts my agency in the other person and lets them dictate how I speak, and even has some moral authority over my speech. When you put it in those stark terms, any preacher would say, absolutely not. We are heralds of the mysteries of God. We cannot do that. But what it does, it subtly does this and becomes part of a preaching ministry. And then the congregation, then that they have that expectation. So when they hear this enough, they start to learn that, if somebody's offended, then something's wrong in the pulpit. Somebody preached something wrong. He said something wrong. And then you layer in modern sensibilities to that. You might even say, well, not only was he not winsome, there's all sorts of accusations you can make against people simply if somebody's feelings get hurt. Now, if somebody's feelings get hurt, maybe that the speaker was unkind or cruel, but maybe he spoke truth in a very gentle and kind way, but it was a direct truth that needed to be heard. That person was hurt. And then we've determined that truth is measured by the subjective feelings of the hearer. So if I'm hurt, then you hurt me. If I feel abused, then you abused me. And, but that's the game. Whenever you buy into this sort of model of preaching and ministry that doesn't give offense, and you can grow a big congregation that way. When you buy into that model, now it's like you have locked yourself into a prison where you are imprisoned by the feelings and perceptions of other people. So I started to realize this, and that unlocked. I thought, well, the way to address this, which I saw as a problem, I'm like, oh, here's a discipleship issue I want to address. And when you address it and you change accordingly, then, people will grow and they'll follow along. It's church ministry. What I realized is that when you address it this way, you're trying to break out of prison, and you're breaking a fundamental rule that has become a moral imperative. So plain spoken. So it's like, I've got this T-shirt. We've adopted this as a cultural value since then, that we have to speak plainly, because that the truth needs to get out. The truth needs to breathe and do its work. So in the pulpit, and one-on-one, and everywhere. Acts 20, Paul says, I did not shrink from declaring to you anything that was profitable. Later on, he said, I did not shrink from declaring to you the whole counsel of God. And so I said, this is our priority. But what was happening in the church before then is this sense of people would get upset. They would leave the church. because I stopped playing by the rules, and that became a basis of accusation. And then over time, it's almost like truth is determined by the majority. And people would say, Michael, these people have left, and they've all been offended. And my response is, okay, let's determine, are they offended for legitimate reasons? What happened? Like, what upset them? And did they address it? Did they talk? And it's always like an emotional thing. They got upset and they left. So then the perception grew that, the pastor's the problem. And he's doing things that are harmful to the church. And as you can imagine, as these things play out in a social environment, I read a book during this time called A Failure of Nerve. It's not a Christian book, but it really helped me to understand dynamics of relationships. And so essentially anxiety was rising within the congregation because there was a leader that had a commitment, like a biblical commitment, that I couldn't budge from. I felt like this is a problem. It's like I cannot let the pulpit be chained to the whims of pressure, what people would be offended or not. And so the blood pressure within the church reached a boiling point, and eventually, it led to all at once, a significant exodus. That was the worst, most painful thing maybe ever in my life. I don't know if it's like, but it was like certainly the worst thing in my entire ministry. But what was crazy is, like, in the aftermath of that, so it's been about a year. It was October of 22. So this was right before I wrote that tweet about my grandfathers. In the years since then, there was a lot of licking our wounds and just recovering. But
so that happened first, then the tweet that went crazy viral.
Yeah.
Okay.
But since then, there's been this sweet peace and this sweet spirit of unity in our church. And the last year has been a delight. It's been wonderful. It's been so healing and refreshing to see just God's people that that hunger for truth, and they want to grow. And it's just been a different kind of environment. And it was a needed thing. I hate that it happened. I still have love and affection for the people that left. It's like my heart goes with them. It's like a shepherd loves the sheep. I love the people. I don't wish them ill. Nevertheless, for the sake of the gospel, the truth, the glory of God, I was like, this had to happen. I could not budge from the commitments that I made. And so that's how it played out. It was unfortunate, but I think God's used it.
No, I mean, it sounds like it ultimately. I mean, even how you're talking and just talking about it and just ministry life in general going forward, even what we've talked about just during this conversation.
Yeah.
It's difficult, right? Because you have it and you think, why this, why that, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I mean, God is faithful. He is worthy. And ultimately standing on the truth, like you said, you're shackled, and then you break out of that, and you're not going to have, the pulpit tied up. I forget how you said it, but, with people's emotions, and I'm not going to say this or that. And that's hard. And I know, I agree. It is difficult, and it's easy to do. I mean, this is why we have the big, speaking big picture stuff. We have the mega church guys, the Osteens and Creflo Dollars and TD Jakes and all these, always, blessing people and on the precipice, and I'm just going to get some financial whatever, and I'm just going to, God's got abundance for me, yada, yada, yada. And that's all great. And yeah, you should preach that, but it's, well, at least not the, loving money part, but like at the same time, that's not the gospel. Right. And that's not the whole message. That's not the whole of Scripture. And you're doing yourself as a pastor, as a proclaimer of the mysteries of God, as teaching and proclaiming the truth. You're you're putting yourself in danger, like grave danger, and
Yeah.
your people, right?
Yes.
But yeah, it's brutal.
Amen.
But it's good to be faithful, right? It's good even
Yeah.
if something happens, even if people leave, even if whatever, you have to say, I stand before Christ, innocent in this regard, because hey, I'm trying to do this right, and help me to learn from where I messed up, whatever. But otherwise, you're holding back, and you're just, I know this, and especially if convictions show up, or you're challenged in something private or whatever, now you're having to be dishonest. Now you're having to lie.
Yeah.
Either interpersonally, one-on-one, or from the pulpit, or public ministry, depending on how big the church is, blah, blah, blah. I see that all the time in the SBC. But that's a whole other conversation. So anyway, where can people find you, Michael Clary? Where can people check you out? What's the church website and your socials and all that?
My social, D Michael Clary. So Michael Clary is the name, and D is my first initial. So that's my Twitter handle, D Michael Clary. I also have a Substack, dmichaelclary.substack.com. My church in Cincinnati is ctkcincy.com. And if you allow me to plug a conference that we're doing this April, it's called Gendered Virtue. Our ministry is called King's Domain, and the conference theme is Gendered Virtue. It's April 18 to 20 of 2024. And we've got Michael Foster, Joe Rigney, Toby Sumter, Shane Morris, myself, and a friend of mine, Matt McBee, that are speaking. Super excited about it. Awesome. The information for that is at genderedvirtue.com.
Okay, cool. Well, yeah, everybody check that out. Check out Michael on Twitter, X, and YouTube. You got some good stuff on YouTube. Not a ton of stuff.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Disparaging, but check out on YouTube.
It's
as well.
new.
What's the YouTube handle?
It's a Plain Speech Podcast. Plain Speech Podcast. That's on YouTube.
Everybody check that out. Go sub there, and follow him on X if you are there as well. Well, it's been a pleasure, brother. I really appreciate it. We'll have to talk again about the book, and because you read a book about sexuality and all that other stuff. Nothing hot buttony or sizzly, scandally at all. Pretty boring topic. So, no, it's been a pleasure, brother. Yeah, thanks, Michael Clary. Appreciate it. God bless. God bless. All right. Oh, I'm rolling. Look at that. Hey, everybody, welcome to Contra Talk. My name is Richard Henry, and this is the podcast where we talk about things that matter. And talking to a first-time guest today, something about matters, blah, blah, blah. I don't even know what I'm doing. What is this? What does this even show?